Mulan Joins the Army, or Maiden in Armor as the movie was called before the English-speaking world knew about the story of Mulan, was released in 1939 and directed by Wancang, starring among others 19-year-old rising Cantonese star Chen Yunshang as the eponymous Hua Mulan, as well as Mei Xi as fellow soldier Liu Yuandu. The movie marks the first major sound film retelling of the popular folk hero story of the female soldier Hua Mulan, also today well known to Western audiences through the 1998 Disney release Mulan and the upcoming live-action movie. The plot centers on the main character Mulan, a young but skilled woman who decides to take her ill-stricken father's place in the fight against nomadic invaders. Disguised as a man, but with the approval of her desperate family, she makes her way to the army. Over the course of the movie, we follow Mulan's courageous way through the army ranks, as well as the fierce battles and clever strategies she employs to win over the nomads.
Shanghai has fallen to Japan. Before the final terrific onslaught of Japan's mechanized army, China is forced to withdraw beyond the Suchao Creek, and Japan's army commander controls all the native sections of the world's sixth largest city.
After the Japanese invasion and the beginning of the Second World War in China in 1937, and the occupation of Shanghai in November of the same year, the established Shanghainese movie industry essentially collapsed. Movie studios were bombed and destroyed, actors fled to places like Chongqing, and it was uncertain what direction movie makers and remaining production studios in the city should take. However, until about December of 1941, the international settlements in Shanghai were shielded from Japanese aggression, and thus this solitary or orphan island gave fertile ground for re-emerging cultural goods such as the film industry. The ready supply of war refugees did not only provide cheap labor forces for local businesses, but also made up quite a substantial part of the audiences for the cultural venues available. And so, Mulan Joins the Army was produced by Wancang Film Studios, a subdivision of the Xinhua Film Company, the largest remaining movie production company left in early occupied Shanghai. And while the owner of the company, Zhang Shangkun, is often a subject of heated debate over his supposed cooperation with the Japanese, the production studio itself was responsible for the release of some of the most popular pictures of the time. The central and most powerful themes of this movie are of nationalism, courage, resistance against outside invaders, and the glory of warfare. Important values that the movie tried to convey to its viewers in a time of brutal occupation by the Japanese forces. The defense of one's nation and the need for incorruptibility is front and center in this movie. Though the time in which it was conceived and the values it tries to convey are quite serious, the movie itself is actually very light-hearted, even in comparison to other Mulan tales and movies. It includes musical bits and scenes of comical relief, as well as a different ending to the story than many other tales of Mulan. However, this movie definitely pulls no punches when it is about the need to fight the enemy. Mulan is frequently seen happily fighting and stabbing enemy soldiers to death. The weakness of the generals and the fearlessness of Mulan portrayed in this movie, such as one of the generals being corrupted by the enemy, are reflections of the general mood within the war-stricken Shanghai. During the enemy's attack, the army's willingness to fight and ignore their corrupt commander, as well as the subsequent admittance of ignorance by the dying general, underlines to the viewer the need for courageous action, and that giving in to the enemy cannot be the right path to victory. The story of Mulan also centers on duty being above the acquisition of status and riches. After many successful military campaigns, the emperor offers Mulan a high-ranking position within his imperial court, but Mulan instead requests to be allowed to return to her home instead. Some suggest that the story could also hint towards an inner transformation and the recognition of one's true desires through the duty in warfare. Mulan's desire to marry Liu Yuandu and settle down instead of joining the imperial court is a realization that came to her during warfare. Thus, as one outlet wrote, in a sense, the film promises that those who enlist will finally discover what has been missing from their lives. While not being outright progressive, sometimes the movie seems to provide a homoerotic undertone. For example, While the soldiers seem unaware of the protagonist's real identity, they immediately comment on her fair complexion and seem to be attracted to Mulan right away. Liu Yuandu, who later becomes Mulan's love interest in the movie, even begins to feel a sense of love towards Mulan after she quote-unquote disguises herself as a woman in a plan to investigate the nomadic enemy forces. While watching the film, it becomes quite obvious that this is an early example of sound film. Just like some of the early sound films from Hollywood, the dialogue seems at times quite weird. A Chinese friend of mine even told me that she thinks the dialogue sounds more like reading than actually speaking. A good example are the early conversations between Mulan and her family.
这一次去从军，能不能活命回来是不晓得。家里的事，全要你当心照管了。
你的年纪大了。 病还没有完全的复原，怎么能受得起战场上的辛苦？叫我怎么能放心？
It is very evident that in comparison to the leftist period, politics depicted in this movie were toned down quite a bit. The somewhat veiled call for patriotism is much less directly in their translation of values to the audience than in movies from the early to mid-1930s. The movie also clearly underlines a return to the Confucius principles of filiality and loyalty, values which in reality resonated with most of the Shanghainese audience watching at the time. In other places as well as later years, the film was seen more controversial, especially because many Chinese applied to Zhang Shangkun the status of a traitor to people and nation for his collaboration with the Japanese. Nonetheless, from a personal point of view, it seems to me that Mulan Joins the Army was released with a purpose which was more than needed at the time. The occupation by the Japanese was yet another shock to the Chinese population, who up to this point already went through an extreme and ever-changing late 19th and early 20th century. Thank you for watching. Until next time.